All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Per Wahlstedt. I work as a support engineer out of our Lund office here in Sweden. And I've apparently been with Qlik for a really long time. All right. So let's take a look at what we're talking about today. So the main focus of this session is going to be the Qlik Sense desktop, mainly the authentication features around it, basically how to unlock it, right? So we're going to go through our different access types that are available for doing that, some technical details around it, and what authentication modes we support, and then we'll go through some questions at the end. So let's dive right into this. So first of all, what's Qlik Sense Desktop? I'm sure most of you already have contact with it already. So it's the purely desktop version of Qlik Sense, right? That's in contrast to our cloud product or to the enterprise version of Qlik Sense. Very similar to the QlikView desktop, if you're familiar with that. So why would you use that compared to any of the other Sense versions that's out there? Well, it basically offers the same functionality as cloud or enterprise, but it does add the ability to use it offline. So if you need to access your reports offline, or if you want to do offline development work, if you don't have access to internet, don't have access to your Sense enterprise instance, this is what you'll be using. And it's a free version of the product. You download it and you can start using it, but you do need to unlock it. We need you to authenticate in some way, especially if you're using the free version, mainly because we just want to keep some track of our users, right? So there are two different ways of unlocking it. We'll go through both of them. There's the free version, which you're probably using right now if you're using Sense Desktop. The typical scenario is that you'll download it from our Qlik.com download page, register for a Qlik account, and activate it if necessary, install it, and then log in with your Sense Desktop, in your Sense Desktop with your Qlik account, right? You're given full access to Qlik Sense Desktop, and you get a 10-day offline grace period. So what does that mean? It means that if you're logged in and authenticated, as long as you log in again within 10 days, you can use it offline as much as you want. After those 10 days have passed, you will need to authenticate again to keep using it. Otherwise, you will be presented with an error message. I'll show you just quickly here my local instance of Qlik Sense Desktop. We're talking about this option. It's what I'm using right now to log in, of course, my Qlik.com account. There's an option to remember password. This page that you're seeing is a Qlik.com web page, right? So it's a login form from Qlik.com. If you for some reason cannot reach this, you will need to check the standard stuff. Do you have internet access? Is Qlik.com up? It's fairly unlikely. We have pretty good uptime, but still. If you're interested in where those credentials are saved or where the access is saved, it's in the Windows Credentials Manager, if you're familiar with that. You can see both the credentials and the actual license being stored. And if you need to verify that a user has received their license, you can check that here. You can also remove them if you need to troubleshoot for some reason. That's the free version. We then have the enterprise version. So this is a little bit newer. If you're from a QlikView background, it might seem familiar because it's quite similar to the license lease model that was present in QlikView. So about the same scenario, right? The user either downloads Qlik Sense Desktop installer or gets it distributed from their IT, right? If this is internal installations. Then we have a new concept called the authentication link, or the magic link internally. This can be distributed in a lot of different ways. We will look at all of those ways in this talk. You can, of course, send it via email, or write it on a piece of paper and give it to the user. Don't do that. But there are also self-service options from the hub, and there's a distribution method using hubs.ini. This type of access does require a user access type token, much like license lease in Qlik. It does have to be a user access type, not the login access type. The user is granted full Qlik Sense Desktop functionality, and also same grace period of 10 days. So why would you use this over the Qlik.com login? Well, you save your users a little bit of a hassle, right? They don't need to create a Qlik.com account or maintain passwords for that. You can automatically set them up with your own authentication. Of course, a rather important point is also that if you use this method, your Qlik Sense Desktop is now a fully licensed product and is covered by maintenance. So you can get full support from us, basically. Some technical background here. So as you can see in this image, we have on the right side authentication towards Qlik.com. On the left side, we show the Sense Enterprise version of authentication. They are both fairly similar. They both use standard web ports, 443 or 80, or if you've configured your own for the proxy, it will use that when you're using your own instance. You can see here also the magic link is involved when you're using the enterprise version. And yeah, that's pretty much it for that. Let's talk about this magic link. So I'll start off by showing this. So this is a local Sense Enterprise installation that I have. This is the QMC view. I will be modifying my proxy settings. So I'll be editing my central proxy. There is a new option called Client Authentication Link. So there's a few fields here that can be configured. First of all, the actual link to your actual Sense instance, right? So in this case, it's my local server. There's a friendly name that you can put here, and I'll show you where that shows up later. It's basically just to let the user know what server they're authenticating against. So it's a good idea to write something here that they might recognize. I can then generate a link. So this is the link that can be distributed to users. When they use this link, their local copy of Qlik Sense Desktop is automatically aware of this Sense installation and that it can authenticate against it. So this can be shared manually. It can be shared by automatically distributing it to a folder. We'll talk a little bit about that later. It does also enable self-service, and I'll show you what that means. So this is my hub. As you'll notice, once I've configured this, there is now an option for client authentication. If I click here, it will automatically add this Sense Enterprise Server as an authentication option to my Sense Desktop. In this case, I don't have a Sense Desktop installed locally, so I can't do it here. But I'll switch over to this machine where I've already done that. So as you can see, I have some new functionality on this window. I can still choose to log in with my Qlik account, but now I also have my server here. And I have also added a user access token to that user, of course. So if I click on this, I get the option to instead now log in with my domain user that I'm using to authenticate towards my hub. And this login page is actually a login form from my proxy, right? From my Sense installation. So let's recap. Requires pre-configuration by administrator. Self-servicing by the end user via the hub. And then we have this third method here that is quite interesting for IT administrators, right? There is a file present in the user profile folder after you've installed Sense, or if this file path does not exist, you can create it. If you copy-paste this activation link into a file called hubs.ini on the user's machine, it will also get this magic link added. So you will also see this authentication method. So this is of course useful if you want to do automatic distribution. You can set up this in multiple types of distribution software to automatically go in and add this to all your users who want to use Sense Desktop and authenticate with this method. So that's pretty nice. You might have a different authentication method set up in your Sense enterprise environment. The desktop does support this. We've tested it with several different authentication forms. For example, the one I used now was NTLM. So if I'm authenticated there, I'll get automatically authenticated using Windows authentication after that, right? It will remember my my details. You can use a web form. There is an option to use a friendly web form here. What that means is that we have some specifications for how to set your web form up if you want to be able to use the remember credentials checkbox, right? You will need to use these specific properties in your form. It might not be for everyone, but if you want to set that up, there's a lot of information on our help page about that. So let's talk about this grace period, right? So it's 10 days. If you log out or close the app, you can then keep using your application for another 10 days, even if you don't have access to either Qlik.com or your Cent Enterprise server. If you try to connect after 10 days, you'll be shown an error message and you'll be taken to the list of authentication hubs. So you'll see the page that we looked at earlier, where you can choose either Qlik.com or your local instance. So let's talk troubleshooting here. These aren't the most complex functions, but there are of course still things that can go wrong. The most typical ones would be, of course, you need to make sure that you actually do have access to Qlik.com if you're using that method, and that your Qlik.com account works. So the first troubleshooting step is always to go to Qlik.com and try logging in manually. If your password is not working, this is not going to work either, of course. Same thing for if you're using the enterprise version, try logging into your server, make sure it actually works from the browser, typically. If you don't have a token assigned, you will get a nice error message explaining that. I made that mistake a couple of times, so that's good. It should be apparent to the user if they don't have the correct login token assigned. And it's a good idea to make sure that you are on the latest version here. September release 3.2. If you're on an older version, some of these features may not be present, either in the desktop client or in the enterprise version. So if your enterprise instance is not on a version that supports this, you will not be able to authenticate against that, of course, even if you've updated the desktop client. So if you're eager to try this out after the call, get on September release, right? That's a good idea. There's the standard network issues as well that you should be aware of course, when it comes to proxy and firewall and stuff like that. Let's go through some frequently asked questions. So this is a pretty common question, right? What information do we actually capture since you are authenticated against our servers? So if you're authenticating against Qlik.com, we do register that authentication action, and that's information that we keep. But anything else is not being gathered, right? Obviously, no data, no system information, or anything like that. If you authenticate against an enterprise server, nothing is collected. Everything goes to that server. Ports, standard web ports, right? Nothing strange here. If you change the proxy URL port, it's going to be using that instead, of course. So if you don't have an enterprise account, if you don't have a token, you can, of course, still go offline for those 10 days. We're mentioning cloud user here as well. A Qlik Sense Cloud account is the same as a Qlik.com account, so that will work as well. So what actually happens when I do go offline? So you still have full functionality, right? Everything is happening locally. Your hub is running locally and your engine is running locally. There's no difference. But you do have to go online and authenticate again after 10 days. So if we're talking support agreement, if you do use the enterprise model here and actually do add authentication towards your enterprise server, yes, this is now a fully supported product. You can do development, whatever you want on it. And if you have problems, you can go straight to us. If you're using the Qlik account to authenticate, it's not technically a supported product. It's a free one. You're not paying maintenance. You will most likely be redirected to the community for support. But we're, of course, still interested in bug reports and stuff like that anyway. And also some more specific information about the versions, right? So if you're not on the correct version of desktop, you won't have some of this functionality. If you're not on the correct version of server, you won't actually have access to the API that's required for this authentication. So if something is not working, that's one of the things you definitely want to try. All right, that's pretty much it. I'm going to take a look at our QA panel to see if you have any questions that I haven't covered yet. So let's see here. We have one question about what version this was introduced in. So some of this functionality is in the June release, I believe. I've been testing it fully on September, and that's what I would recommend you use here. I think there may have been some changes, for example, to the offline functionality. The grace period might not be working exactly the same. So if you want to be on the safe side here, make sure everything is on September 3.2 or later. So I had another question here about someone having issues with Sense Desktop Authentication where it doesn't realize that it is offline and still tries to authenticate towards the server. So I haven't seen those issues specifically. It might be something you want to contact support about. I can imagine that there may be differences in how it handles this depending on how you disable your networking, right? So if you are still connected to a Wi-Fi, for example, but you don't have internet access through that, that might be handled differently. If you completely disable your network device, that might also give a different behavior. So I would test that out. But if you can't figure out what's causing it, feel free to contact support. That's something we would be interesting to look at. There is a question about this hubs folder, right, where you're doing the automatic distribution. The question is if it's normal that that folder does not show up. And I think it is. When I tested it here as well, I had to create both the folder and the file to do the distribution. So I think that is correct. So another question was if there is an auto-renew of the license, similar to how Qlik license lease works. And pretty much, right? As long as you have access to the whatever you're authenticating against, if it's Qlik.com or if it's your local instance, every time you open the Sense desktop, it will re-authenticate. So that will refresh your 10 days. So there's no need to manually renew that. Another question about why it's not possible to authenticate against a development environment, only against production. If I remember correctly, that was the same in QlikView, so there's probably a reason for that from our product managers. But I can definitely check with them. If that's a common request to be able to do that, maybe we can take a look at that. So final question maybe. There's one about if at some point there are plans to let a Sense desktop user be able to see their apps in the cloud hub, for example, or in the enterprise hub instead of just their local hub. And that's, of course, a fantastic suggestion, and I'm not sure how much I can talk about it, but obviously that is something that's being looked into as a pretty clear way of extending the desktop functionality. So I would not be surprised to see more about that in the future.
Okay, last question, Per?
Yeah. So there is a question about the authentication link, if it is connected to a user or not. And I don't believe it is, right? When you generate it, you can distribute that to any number of users. It will just link them to your instance, and it will not be user-specific. You do, of course, need to make sure that they all have their access token. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this session. And thank you to Per for presenting. We always appreciate getting experts like Per to share with us. We've got a quick legal disclaimer for you. And thank you once again, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.